Okay, let's get started. Welcome to our session about top trends in employee surveys. We've got robots and Fitbits and Renoir. Oh my! What's been happening in the marketplace we'll be talking about, and we'll distill it down to 5 key points of advice to help navigate this changing landscape we're in, certainly even before the pandemic, but certainly during the pandemic too. Keeping in touch with employees has a different spin than it used to. And we all know the world can change pretty fast, but there are some enduring fundamentals that we will review. But first, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Don't worry about jotting down copious notes. We'll be sending around the slides and some follow-up conversations at the conclusion of the conference. Also, we are recording this session, and this and most of the other sessions from our conference. The recordings will be available on our website afterwards. And stay tuned at the end in your browser where you launched the Zoom app from. You will see a survey at the end that asks you about how well this session fits your needs and so forth and so on. So before we get too far into this, who are we? Victoria, you want to go first?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. My name is Victoria Hendrickson. I'm a partner and vice president with OV on our consulting side. I work primarily in our employee survey and research practice. I have background in PhD in IO.
Yep, and that makes me Scott Brooks. We're pretty easy to tell our voices apart. I'm one of the founding partners and vice president of OrgVitality. I lead the consulting practice, particularly focused on surveys, but other organizational research as well. Together we've been doing this kind of thing for quite a long time. So let's dive in. I want to start with a quick first story. This was something that happened to us, and you know, we got a question. It's like, hey, we need to survey more about engagement. We said, great, let's do it. Why, by the way? What are you thinking? What's behind it? What are you looking to accomplish? Like, well, we need to know if employees feel safe. So that gave us a little bit of pause. Let's step back for a second. You know, while it's not exactly one of our top 5 per se, it is a key theme that's thread through. It's like, make sure you're asking the right questions. There is sort of an enduring psychological note that if you want to know about X, ask about X. If you want to know about Y, don't be asking about X. So anyway, let's keep going to help set the stage.
Yeah, here's another common conversation we're having with clients right now as they adapt to the quote unquote new normal, or what surveys look like in our current times. We've got clients that'll reach out with the request to do very frequent pulses, even daily. And we say, great, let's do it. Why, by the way? And they say that managers are really busy figuring out how to help their teams adapt to the new work from home situations. And so that's where we pause a bit. There's a lot of truth to this. Managers are certainly busy helping their teams adapt, and there's a timely, urgent need for the business to move forward, as well as for employees to feel like they're contributing meaningfully in this time. And look, we're all for surveys and for feedback, and it can be incredibly useful used in the right way. But if managers are already underwater, extra data to process and an extra assignment is probably not the immediate solution. There's a chance it could be viewed by managers as just one more HR task that's added to their plate. And worse, employees could see that their feedback is going by without consideration or action in an especially sensitive time. So in this circumstance, you know, adding another survey or adding another daily pulse is probably not the right solution. So, you know, that takes us to how we think about surveys in our current context. And that brings us to a common headline we're seeing right now, that work will never be the same. And it's a tough headline to see out there. It's clear that our world is changing, and that does include the world of work. Work is a big part of our lives, and it's shifting quite a bit. We can speculate about how long these disruptions will last or what the new normal will look like for organizations, but the truth is we don't know. What we can speak about with confidence is the way that all of us here today as survey practitioners can support our organizations and the individual employees. And the way we can do that is by connecting organizations with leadership goals and helping provide targeted, meaningful feedback that will enable leaders to understand and respond to the needs of employees in a targeted quick way. So, you know, if we think about how to navigate this changing landscape, you know, philosophically, what I just said, you know, might make sense. How we actually put that into practice isn't so simple. It's quite challenging. And I'm sure many of you on the phone are feeling this pull. You have existing survey programs that in a lot of ways have to continue in the way that you've set them up. But in a lot of other ways, they really need to adapt to the new normal. There are questions over, you know, what's the right content? What do we ask about? What's the right cadence? And how do we frame the surveys to best support employees? And at the same time, we still have huge growth in technology to support these efforts, and we have more sources of data than we've ever had before. So, you know, the way we approach our research questions or our data questions about employees is more and more clouded. It's easy to get wrapped up in technical possibilities. You can survey constantly. You can connect every case of individual data. But the real question that we're going to keep stepping back to is what serves the purpose we asked about earlier? What's going to answer the meaningful questions your leaders have, and how can we use this enormous amount of data and tech capability to answer those strategic questions so that we can guide targeted action at scale? So there's a lot in that question. Scott and I are going to go through 5 trends that'll address how we can start to strike this balance across all of your different programs.
Right. So number one, or the thumb of our handful of points here, is to be strategic is to be unique. Now, if you step back, a lot of people use the word strategic to mean big picture or connected to outcomes, but what does it really mean? You know, in organizations, particularly in this time, we want to maybe predict the future. We want more sales or market share. And those are aspirations. Those are not strategies. Strategies are not more of a good thing. Strategies are approaches for whether you turn left or right, whether you make a decision to pursue a market in another country or another channel of distribution. That's different than an aspiration or just wanting more of a good thing. So just like we want more sales or market share, we want maybe more engagement for our employees. But again, that's not a strategy, that's an aspiration. You know, so what is a strategy? Or what is more important? Well, how you might engage employees could be a strategy. But maybe better is, what do you do with engaged employees? That's what helps make you unique, right? That's what helps you pursue a real strategic survey. And so our point here is that the more your approach is strategic, the more it will need to be unique. Now, not all surveys, not all HR efforts need to be strategic. Some things you do are just about getting the job done, keeping the lights on, pursuing some fundamentals. It's not about maximizing the uniqueness of your organization or the ways you use human capital. But it is true that if you do want something to be strategic, you cannot copy your way to competitive differentiation. You can't copy your rivals and expect to beat them in the marketplace. And so if you do aspire to something that's strategic, one implication is that, you know, off-the-shelf approaches are not strategic and don't provide a competitive advantage, because you need to tap into something that is unique for you. If you do just use something off the shelf or generic, you might be sub-optimizing because it's not trying to maximize the uniqueness of who you are. It might not be, say, pursuing the collaborative cross-functional way that you expect to win in the future. It might not be pursuing the ways that you expect a customer co-creation to drive innovations and separate you from your competitors. It might be not exactly what executives stay awake all night worrying about, which is often, in an ideal world, what's making your organization unique and separate. So this is the thumb, I said, and that sets us up for the second one, which is implications for our data landscape.
Yeah, the second piece here is about how we put that data landscape together. And so the title here is that holistic programs are more valuable than the sum of their parts, or so your whole listening strategy is going to be much more valuable and give you more nuanced, actionable information as compared to any individual survey that you conduct. And this is one thing we've been seeing really increase over the last year is really the rise of a true holistic listening strategy, and an emphasis on the strategy there rather than a couple standalone surveys, but really stepping back and looking at how these things fit together. For several years, we've all been hearing that the traditional annual census engagement survey is dead. No surprises there, that it still appears to be dead. And there have been different trends coming in, going around pulsing and non-survey listening, different kinds of continuous listening. And there will always be different methods of collecting the data and trends that come and go as far as the mechanics. But the key point I want to emphasize here is the real integration of data sources into an intentional strategy. So we're seeing organizations benefit from integrating multiple touch points rather than depending on one event-based survey. So this often involves connecting an organizational effectiveness or perhaps broader engagement survey along with specific life cycle events that align with that organization's life cycle or unique rhythms throughout the year, such as onboarding, exit, upward feedback, perhaps product launch confidence surveys, or things that really provide information into the key pieces of an employee's experience throughout the year. And as I'm saying all of this, you might step back and say, well, several surveys is much more work than doing one event-based survey, and it absolutely is. Running multiple programs requires a lot more planning, and bringing that strategic aspect to the integration takes even more planning than each of the parts, but it allows a much greater focus on the content and the action assignment for each program, rather than expecting everyone to be responsible for everything. And we know how that goes. We can be much more targeted. So, the challenge, if you decide to take it, is to make sure that each program or component of the strategy has a unique purpose and a clear call to action. So, for example, don't add an onboarding survey because other companies have them. Maybe you add it because you expect an influx of hiring in a strategic part of the organization, and you want to make sure you have the right systems to get people up to speed. So that's a great strategic purpose, and then make sure you have a clear set of people who are going to act on those findings and be able to put those into place. And that leads into the second challenge that comes with this trend is you'll have more data to act on. So if you're going to be running several surveys or employee research streams, you're going to multiply the amount of data and data findings you have. And initially, your reaction might be, well, more data is better. And it certainly can be, but it does bring more responsibility to listen and act appropriately. And so we find the key here is to use integrations of the data to make it easier to understand data patterns and implications and to move forward. So if this is something you're thinking about, I'd consider integrated dashboards that bring together each data source rather than looking at them separately. This will help your users prioritize findings and know what they really want to move forward on. And this kind of clarity and prioritization might make intuitive sense, but it does take that stepping back to that original point of being strategic so that you're ultimately aligned with your organizational goals.
And that's actually the perfect setup for our third point, which is that while we're dwelling in data, really the precious commodity is attention, not the data itself. So quick question, how many of you, and this don't need answers here, but look at your wrist right now. Do you have some smart device, a Fitbit or a smartwatch or an Apple Watch, something like that measures something for you, steps or some other activity? And you think about that, and right now, with that or with other things, you have more data at your fingertips than you could ever possibly manage. Not just in your Fitbit or your watch, but regarding your bank or your health, and not to mention about your job, and not to mention what a manager has about them and their job and so forth. So, what does this lead us conclude is that there is a knee-jerk old adage, what gets measured gets done, And we would say that that's out of date for an information-saturated workplace. We all know this adage, but rather we would change it to be what stays on your radar gets done. That's where it really hits home. And so the rare commodity here is not going to be data, but attention. And there's a lot of competition for people's energy, particularly now in a pandemic kind of situation. There's a lot of distractions, a lot of newness, a lot of concern about operations or job security or whatever it might be. And so how do you respond to that? And one of our other knee-jerk responses is, well, we need to make a business case. But let's step back to the whole Fitbit idea. How many of you need to know better the business case that more exercise is good for you, or eating better is good for you? Or any of us who might smoke, you know, that smoking is bad for you. Those business cases has been made. We don't need to be more convinced about the truth of those statements. And yet, we don't always exercise, or we don't always do the right things. So part of the implication here is that we want to pay attention to what actually changes behavior, not just supplying data. There's some really cool research with activity trackers that was, you know, published in American Medical Association kinds of journals with random assignment to condition and all the kinds of statistical controls that you would want. And the basic conclusion is that people who had the activity trackers, the Fitbits, the watches, the whatever, they wound up 8 pounds heavier after the study was concluded than the other group that didn't have any. And part of the deal was, part of the explanation was that it changed people's behavior. Sure, I might have been more likely to get 10,000 steps, but once I do, I say to myself, hey, 10,000 steps, I get a cookie. And so it doesn't always, data doesn't always produce the outcomes that we want. And so an implication here is that when we design, whatever our design is, we want to design for capturing attention and nudging and compelling action, not just pushing data. There is some really exciting new developments that we're involved with, along with a bunch of others, about how nudges get to really prompt more change. And it's not just pushing more data, it's pushing more data in the appropriate kinds of ways. And I know that there's a session tomorrow where Sachin Jain from PepsiCo will talk a little bit about some of what's going on there. But this, again, then will set up a little bit of a need, which is how does all this get managed? Well, you need good technology and you need good programming and efforts.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, the fourth point here relates to the overall rise of AI in our field and how we can use different kinds of algorithms and machine learning to do our job in a more effective way. And the point I want to make here is that machines don't replicate people. They do use different skills, and they work at a different scale. So what I want to separate here is, you know, when can we get great value and use out of using machine learning, and when are we better off doing it the way we've done it before? You know, you've all seen different ways that machine learning has impacted in our field and come through in the last year or two. And we've seen different things as far as automating analyses, trying to predict turnover is a really common one, categorizing text in surveys, and suggesting actions. Some of these are really useful innovations and make our jobs easier, but some of these are distracting as AI is much better matched to some tasks than others. And you know, there are some dangers in using these technologies without understanding the way they work. And I'll speak about this in a whole lot of depth tomorrow in another webinar if this piques your interest. But for now, you know, a short example is the use of deep learning in selection as a way that AI isn't always optimized. So with some algorithms used in selection, there was a sales manager role where the machine was choosing candidates that had experience as a high school quarterback on their resume with just, you know, really high levels. And the analysts went back and said, why is this? And it turned out that the machine was doing its job. It was predicting, what is a likely successful profile for this sales manager on these resumes based on who's been successful in this role in the past. And clearly in the past, somebody had being a high school quarterback on their resume. And so this is an area where technically the machine worked, but it was replicating a very biased decision because the previous success in that role was very biased and specific. So we were getting to still flawed decisions, we were just getting to those decisions faster. So that's one example of when it's not a great fit, but there are a lot of ways in which machine learning can add quite a bit to the organization effectiveness work we do. One example is natural language processing and unstructured qualitative data. There are already plenty of systems to code comments the way humans do, but the best use is when NLP can apply analyses that humans can't, or apply topic models that humans can't. What it's really valuable at is identifying relationships we didn't know to look for. So looking for co-occurrence of topics that naturally float together rather than straightforward broad codes that humans can code on their own. Other algorithmic solutions are great for identifying usefulness or sentiment. Again, looking for different kinds of feedback that humans aren't going to be able to do at scale on the really massive data sets our organizations have. So, these solutions bring together data in different formats or from different sources in a much more efficient way. And so that's ways that, they're not only adding the skill of bringing together these different formats, but they're also doing it, again, at scale on those large data sets. I think another area where we recommend capitalizing on the scale of machine learning is action planning. In an ideal world, we would be able to sit down with every manager that has a data report, and we'd be able to help them prioritize what they should work on and chat about how they should get started. And I'm going to take a wild guess that no one on the phone has the luxury of doing that. Maybe you are able to do it with your very senior leaders at the top, but probably not with the bulk of the organization where a lot of cultural change really happens. And so an unfortunate alternative is often that frontline managers become paralyzed with increasing amounts of data. They don't know what to do, and so they do nothing. So there you can enter action planning algorithms. A really well-tuned algorithm can be applied to manager-level results at scale and identify 2 or 3 items where that specific manager can have an impact. The skill here is certainly second to a seasoned consultant, but the scale is far above the bandwidth that the human process can have. And so it's certainly going to be a benefit in getting them started. So the implications here of how to use machine learning in any of your individual survey programs will vary, but think about where your program can benefit from varied skills and increased scale. And then, of course, how to bring that together with the human touch. And I know Scott's going to talk about how to bring those together to tell the story.
Right. So, all of this is talking about driving things from your strategic interest, from what executives care about, and moving through whatever machinery or mechanisms or reporting that you've got to what really compels action. Because it's not just about the data, it's about the action. And so a lot of this is trying to weave this together in a tapestry that tells a story. Storytelling generally is certainly a great topic. I love it. There's another webinar that I've done that's on our website about storytelling, just all straight up. But there's an aspect here that covers a theme that we've been talking about of what's strategic, what maximizes uniqueness, what drives towards action, and what leverages technology to help make all this happen at scale. And so there's this meta theme. And so part of what we're looking for out of this story, 2 components I want to highlight, is one, you're talking about the story of employee perspectives and what can employees say and how do they feel. And certainly in this time of COVID-19, we're wondering about, are people feeling safe? Are they healthy? Are they together? Are they bonded? Are they concerned? Are they able to work as they want to? All of these things are true. But, part of this too is like we want the unique flavor of this. Here's a question for you. If you were to take your survey and everybody else who's on the phone, and all the surveys got dumped into the middle of the room, how easy would it be for a fairly independent but informed observer to sort back your surveys to you and to the other person, the person next to you, in a correct way? Is there something unique enough about it that we know the stories that your organizations are trying to tell, and that the data that gets collected contributes to that story, right? So we want to know the employee perspective, and that's where the data comes from, but we want to make sure that all of these are capturing our unique organizational challenges, right? And so, you know, more than just we want people to be more engaged or employer of choice, part of the story that can emerge is this is how we're going to co-create innovative solutions with our customers as a way to drive revenue and win in the marketplace. And this is what gets people excited. Or is your main storyline, you know, safety is what we're going to be known for. And this is a place where people can come and be physically and psychologically safe to do the best work of their lives. Whatever it is that you want, each of those points you're trying to drive will be unique to each of you. And all of this would tell a compelling vision, and it will motivate action of how to get there. So this covers our 5 trends, and we're going to wind up with a couple of other quick stories.
Yeah. So here we're back to an example client conversation, and this time a client's asking for weekly sampled pulses. And we're ready to get started, but again, we want to ask why and make sure it's a strategic fit for them. And this client says they want to understand how their workforce is adapting to the new reality and figure out what they need to be effective. And this makes total sense. The survey goal is targeted to the issue at hand, the mechanics fit what's reasonable for the organization, and they seem ready to act on it. And so we're ready to go and want to get started on this. And so with all of these examples, we want to step back and look at some advice of how you all move forward as our chaotic world continues. You know, what do these trends mean for all of you on the phone in your programs? And it really boils down to a refocus across all 3 components of evidence-based change that we've got here: the strategy, insight, and action. And you know, what we want to say is, rather than starting with the mechanics, start with the unique strategy of your program and how it can be leveraged to feed leaders with data that will help them stay connected to employees in chaotic times. Then consider action. Who are these findings for? Are they for top leadership? Are they for local managers? And what's the assignment? Are they supposed to watch this data over the coming weeks and how things shift? Are they supposed to act right away? Make it really easy for your stakeholders to understand data implications and to move forward quickly. And then you can consider insight or mechanics and what it'll take to make these strategic points happen. Said another way, build the mechanics around your strategy, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. And so this brings us to sort of a final point that we want to make, that in today's world, with so many different organizations in different stages of all kinds of different evolution, we could do more things, and the technology enables almost anything, and that's awesome. You don't just draw a circle like you might have used to, you can draw anything. That's fantastic. And so, to draw a little metaphor here, how do we know what's a good survey if anything can happen? That freedom brings a certain amount of chaos. And so you could look at art, right? We're in a modern art world of surveys, and a traditional master here like Renoir, you know what's going on in this painting. You can evaluate it. You know this person has skill. You know it's a good, effective painting that evokes a certain kind of reaction, right? Well, how about this one? That's Jackson Pollock. And we probably all know Jackson Pollock, but is there skill? It's harder to know. Actually, if you look really closely, some of the yellow really picks up the vibe of employee engagement, and some of the orange is all about customer focus, but that's hard to tell until you've really studied it and so forth. But in terms of one thing here, it is true that at the time, this Renoir was $78 million in 1990. I think it was the second highest valued painting at the time, and $200 million for the Jackson Pollock in 2015. So what works and has value is really hard to tell. So that gives you the image that we're sort of shooting for. Today, we're in a modern art era of surveys. I want to conclude by just reminding people, if you haven't heard already, that OrgVitality has been offering a free Wellbeing and Business Resilience survey available in multiple languages, and we've had, I think, almost 40,000 people respond to the survey so far. If you're interested and you want to deploy this within your own organization, send us a note, look at our website. There's multiple ways to sort of just reach out and be in touch. So that concludes our session today, and thanks for joining us, and have a good rest of your day, and hope you enjoy some of the other sessions in our virtual conference. Bye-bye, everybody.